What I would mean by that, and the evidence I would bring to bear on that, is that for what we consider healthy human beings, we do exaggerate our past. We remember that we gave more to charity, that we had kids that walked and talked at an earlier age, that we voted in elections that we didn't vote in, that our grades were better than they really were. So we must have a reason for having these sort of spontaneous shifts in our recollection to remember ourselves in more prestige-enhancing ways. Maybe that's consoling to us, rather than to remember.
For what? For what are you seeking consolation? I mean,
to avoid depression.
Are these guilt feelings or responsibilities?
One question is why consolation and not forgiveness or mercy? I mean, because the suggestion, if you asked for forgiveness, is that you've committed some bad acts and you want to come to terms with those. And I would agree with Germaine that maybe in the end you can't ever fully come to terms with them, especially when you think about being part of a species that's committed many bad acts. But you might at least ask for some mercy if you can possibly get some. But consolation suggests that the only problem is that there's pain and suffering, and not that there's evil. And I think that's one of the things that's troubling us about the question.
No, but the only thing I want consolation for is the fact that I will not be here after, let's say, 10 or 15 years. Okay. That my life is ending. That's where I seek consolation for.
And there's many things. There's many things that you have in life that you have to explain. There's every day you look at. I look out, at least to get personal, and see these things that I could have done, these things I could have been, this life I could have had that I don't. And I have to look back over that span of time and ask this question. Were those decisions that led to these consequences worth it? Worth giving up this, worth giving up that, worth having sacrificed this much and sacrificed that?
In fact, you disprove with yourself, with your own acts, and need consolation for that.
Yeah.
But is there...
Well, again, in some instances, looking back on it, you can say, here is this thing that is here today. For some, it'll be a child. I didn't become the musician I would have become because I stopped to have a family. Okay, so I'm not that musician, and I have to ask myself the question, why? What is this? Well, it's this family. Okay, fine. Does that console you? Does that answer it?
There is no consolation in that way, I think.
Okay.
Okay.
Martha made a distinction about an hour ago between the case of the individual life and the case of human life as a whole. It seems to me you could restate it by saying there are many consolations for the thought of our individual deaths. We get those out of memories of our individual lives, having our consciousness expand, having had our consciousness expanded by Proust at one point, for example. The question, is there consolation for human history, is an utterly different question, and that depends on hope for the human future. It doesn't depend on looking back over the human past. It's just another way of saying that the political issue and the personal issue don't seem, commensurable.
I'd like to go back to Leon Lederman's vision of the world. I mean, it seems to me that is enormously consoling that we have come out of the forest 4 million years ago, and we know something thanks to Jane Goodall about apes, and that's how we once were, more or less. And I'm just astonished at how well we've done. It's an amazing jump from even however much we love the apes. It's an amazing jump from them to us. And the fact that we've messed up shouldn't surprise anybody. The amazing thing is that we're still around and we're still, in fact, capable of improvement.
I think it might be useful for me to indicate what kind of shall we say, charge I got out of this combination. See, I assumed that whoever thought of this idea was a pessimist. Like many of us, I think, appear to be on this table, that this pessimist had sat down, just looked at the world, found it intolerable, found it totally, intolerable, anti-human, contrary to what that individual defined as humanity. And so that was the premise from which I began. And that it sat down and said, well, what exactly, what is there to ameliorate my responses to my environment, to my very existence? And decided that, well, just those moments of recognition of beauty, of extraction of beauty from the real world, from the imaginary world, from the artistic world, from human conduct, just those moments have provided the soul consolation. And I thought that the quest was in pursuit of other human beings who maybe also found this moment, these moments of beauty, which serve as a kind of tolerance, toleration mechanism for existence. In other words, it could easily have been, I thought, justice and consolation, empathy and consolation, cookery and consolation, painting and consolation. That's what I thought. But the premise from which I began was that somebody found this world totally intolerable, like many people do.
But we can put our own interpretation.
Consolation is a kind of good feeling, a status of the mind, what you like. Okay. But consolation is somehow in a time relationship with something else, which happened already, which was bad, and now is coming something which somehow is a correction of this mis-event. And I don't share this type of view, because if I would be asked what is the meaning of this moment, then I would say this moment itself and maybe the next one. So this continuity of the life which approves itself. And therefore, I don't believe neither that this life is such an intolerable, terrible scandal that we should be somewhere consoled for it. Because for the vast majority, this life is now not full of physical pain. Maybe they ate something, and maybe they slept, and maybe they can breathe. So the most elementary physical functions are working. And the suffering belongs to the life. We get the sufferings also as a present from our fate. And with the so-called beautiful moments, or with all the moments which can be beautiful even in the suffering, it's one package. And this package doesn't need the consolation, because it happens so. And it's not possible to have a correction for the life with all the crimes and happinesses which belong to it.
I have another kind of twist to put on this, and that's, you talk about consolation being for something that's happened in the past, to do with forgiveness or comfort or something like that. But in the work that I'm doing now with young people, in many countries, in many places, in apparently hopeless places like inner cities, like some parts of the developing world in huge poverty, children are living without hope, and children who are thinking in our developed world and who think about the pollution, the destruction of the environment, the cruelty, the war, the whole, the whole spectrum of how we have destroyed this planet. When I think how it was when I was born 66 years ago, and how it is now for my grandchildren who are small, and I think of what we've destroyed in that interim time, it is shocking. And when young children or, students start thinking this way, they tend to lose hope. They've told me so again and again and again. And so I see my role, which I'm doing my best to fulfill, as trying to go around and offer glimmerings of hope to young people by trying to get them to understand that we can change the course of the world, we can begin to slow down the destruction of the planet, only if everyone realizes that they've got to take action themselves, that it's not just a problem that's somebody else's, we all take part in it. And to give little gleams of hope in hopeless places, to me seems something that's worth doing. And I'll give you one example. I mean, there are many, but one that I found fascinating. I went to Shanghai last year, and I was talking in a big girls' school. Now, okay, these weren't the most poverty-stricken Chinese girls, but they were Chinese girls, and they were living in a situation where it's pretty grim for them. And I talked to them about looking around. I said, look in the newspapers, listen to your television and your radio, talk to each other, think among yourselves of who you know and what you've seen and what you've heard that's positive, that's hopeful. And cut it out or write it out and stick it on your notice board. So they started to do this, apparently, and they quickly filled up their notice board. And these are things like polluted streams that they were beginning to clean up. They were things like people who are spending more concern for girl orphans, all these kinds of things. And it spilled off the notice board and it went across the wall of the classroom. And the next door classroom thought, hey, this is exciting. So they started it in their classroom. Now they have these long corridors, because you know how many thousands of kids are in these schools. And they're calling these the walls of hope. And Shanghai has now declared itself to be, the Roots and Shoots is the name of this children's program, Roots and Shoots City of Hope for 2000. I'm not quite sure yet what that means. I'm going to find out, but they're very, very active now in many of the girls' schools and now the boys' schools in Shanghai. So to be able to go and give hope, because if you don't have hope, you fall into apathy. And if you fall into apathy, if we all fall into apathy, then we have no business producing any more children. If you've lost hope and you get it back, then that's a kind of consolation. It's a soothing. It's like a mother stroking the fevered brow of her child.
We're admitting in this discussion that there are